There's a small fear I have that the Americans will do a deal with the regime.
There's where I don't think you're right. I don't think he does want to negotiate with him. What I'm obviously hoping for is that there will be strikes both on the ballistic missile program and on the leaders. I think it's, high time to assassinate those Ayatollahs, and especially Khamenei.
Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, and as per usual, I'm here with my co-host, Ruthie Bloom. Ruthie, what a few days we're having, even longer, with this stuff going on in Iran. Is it more of the same, or are we going to see some revolutionary changes?
Well, I know you don't always agree with me on this point, but I have to say that it doesn't look like more of the same. First of all, what we're seeing, aside from the fact that these demonstrations have been going on day after day, and the protesters are being gunned down in the streets across the Islamic Republic, and they're not letting up in spite of being gunned down. We don't know the exact number. There are all kinds of quotes. Some say 2,000 people have been killed. Some say 20,000. It's not clear because aside from the fact that the regime shut down all the internet, and yes, Elon Musk provided Starlink, it's still very vague about what's going on there. But I will say one thing. I am sure that President Trump is planning a major operation, military operation, not just cyber and all that, and that possibly Israel will be or is already involved.
So first of all, on the issue of the numbers, it's true. We don't know the numbers. The regime, I think, said it was like in the 2000 or something. And then the Iranian opposition group, the Iranian television opposition channel, said 12,000. And that's already yesterday. It could be more today. What's interesting is the media, the international media, the Western media is very careful with the numbers and just as open to something that we're not going to go into. But when they used Hamas's numbers out of Gaza, they never had a problem with using those numbers, did they? But let's leave that aside. The numbers are not clear of the number of deaths, but what is clear is the regime is being ruthless. And that's why, to a certain extent, I'd like to have your confidence that the regime is not going to survive, but I cannot have that confidence because, I think there's a strong probability the regime won't survive. In my New Year predictions, I said the regime would fall, but I can't be totally sure precisely because they are ruthless. Because they are willing to gun down people, that you've got the besiege and the revolutionary guards and these people who are like the Waffen SS. They are ideologically committed to the regime's survival. They also think that they themselves personally and their families will pay a huge price if the regime falls. The retribution of the Iranian people, the justified retribution of the Iranian people against the apparatus of the state that oppressed them so much and massacred their people and so forth. And so I think a clear thing to see how this is going, there are a number of factors which we can discuss, but are there cracks in the ruling regime? Because if these people are simply willing to keep massacring and murdering all the opposition, so this can become a meat grinder. This can go on for ages.
Oh, absolutely. And I will say, when I said that I'm sure President Trump is planning a major operation, I did not say that that will cause the regime to immediately fall. And there I agree with you that I don't think that that's so imminent for a few reasons. But that doesn't mean that it's not on the way to falling. The timeline, I don't have the timeline. But this is the only way. The regime will not fall because of protests in the street. And it won't even fall because of military attacks on ballistic missiles or perhaps even on figures like the Ayatollah Khamenei. What makes the regime crack or fall, what would make the regime fall, is if the Revolutionary Guards and Besiege and the army begin to defect. That would cause it to fall. And we're not seeing that yet, but I believe that more military strikes will instill fear in the Revolutionary Guards, that they're just the way with Hezbollah in Lebanon, with the beeper operation. Once you instill fear in these animals, you cause them to rethink what side they've got to be on. Many might try to flee. We already know that the Iranian foreign minister, and I'm going to say that with quotes, okay, is in Lebanon, took his wife and kids to Lebanon, for talks with the Lebanese government about Hezbollah and all that. But come on, he didn't have to bring his wife and kids. It's clear that this was his way of escaping. And so if we see more of that, what I'm obviously hoping for is that there will be strikes both on the ballistic missile program, ballistic missiles themselves, and on the leaders, on the leadership. I think it's, high time to assassinate those Ayatollahs, and especially Khamenei, and that sends a clear message. That's what I'm hoping for. I don't know if that's in the cards, but I am sure that behind the scenes, both President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are discussing this daily.
I'm sure you're correct. I'm sure there's very close coordination between Israel and the United States. It doesn't mean that, we share the same strategic objectives. It doesn't mean we agree on everything as this crisis develops. There's a small fear I have that the Americans will do a deal with the regime, that all this talk about an attack, all this talk about sanctions, all this talk about supporting the demonstrators is actually a way to put pressure on the regime to agree to Trump's longstanding demands that they have to end their military nuclear program. And that because he's a negotiator, because as everyone says, it's almost a cliche today, he's a transactional president, they are weak. They will now agree to the deal that he wants. And therefore, he'll make a deal with the regime that will allow this regime, maybe much more limited in what it can do, but he'll allow the regime to stay in power. And all those people who want democracy in Iran will be disappointed. Maybe not unlike Venezuela. We've seen how Trump has dealt with Venezuela. He's decapitated an authoritarian regime. That regime now, according to the Trump understanding, and he could be 100% correct, will now act more in the American interest and not be opposed to America. Is that his plan also for Iran?
Now, see, there I disagree with you, and I think, and what we're going to see.
I was asking a question. I was not.
We were asking a question, but what I think is this: there are a few reasons. First of all, I think the word democracy, we don't hear that a lot. We hear the word democracy bandied about when the isolationists within the Republican Party want to talk about Iraq. They say, oh, yes, the neocons thought we were going to democratize Iraq, and look what happened, and it was a disaster. And they use the word democracy in that way, oh, you're naive, you're going to...
Nation building.
Nation building, democracy. So forget the word democracy for a minute. Because you know what? All the people who said when the war in Gaza started, but what about the day after? What about the day after? And, it was, first of all, let's kill the enemy. Okay, what about the day after? The day after happens along the way you're planning that. That's number one. And I don't think Trump ever said, democracy. But he has another reason that I think that he has gone out so far on a limb, and he has said, not only did he post this on Truth Social yesterday, but he also gave a speech. And let's hear what he actually had to say from the horse's mouth, as we say.
To all Iranian patriots, keep protesting, take over your institutions if possible, and save the name of the killers and the abusers that are abusing you. You're being very badly abused. If the numbers are right now, I hear 5 different sets of numbers. I hear numbers, look, 1 death is too much. But I hear much lower numbers, and then I hear much higher numbers. But I say save their names because they'll pay a very big price. And I've canceled all meetings with the Iranian officials until the senseless killing of protesters stops. And all I say to them is help is on its way. You saw that I put tariffs on anybody doing business with Iran. Just went into effect today. And I say make Iran great again. It was a great country until these monsters came in and took it over.
So you see, Mark, he is not only saying help is on its way and that he canceled all talks with the Iranian, with the regime. And you keep saying, yes, but, he's transactional. And therefore, what he's trying to do is they'll stop the killing and then he wants to negotiate about the nuclear program. But he already believes that he has killed the nuclear program, basically. All right. So there's where I don't think you're right. I don't think he does want to negotiate with them. And he didn't say democracy. He said, make Iran great again. Iran wasn't a democracy under the Shah. It was modernizing. The Shah was modernizing. It was. And the thing is, it wasn't an Islamist, vile Islamist, not just Islamic, Islamist republic. There are many, most Iranians were Zoroastrian in their background, and they were quite modern, etc. So I believe making those kind of statements means we're on the way. What is we're on the way? It means planes, bombs. I don't know about boots on the ground, but certainly bombs hitting the ground.
So I'll respond to a few things. I mean, I listen to Trump and I listen to every word, and the words he uses are important, especially since he wrote it, he posted it, and then he repeated the same words, which means the formulation is very clever. First of all, when he tells the people to write down the names of the people involved in massacring the protesters, right? That's a clear message, that's a threat, and that will encourage, hopefully, and we have to see the effect, but I think the desire is to see the regime's elements of internal security falling apart, that they won't follow the orders, that they'll fear the retribution of the people together with the retribution of the United States. That's basically what he said. I mean, when Trump says to them, write down the names of the people oppressing you, the people killing you, that's a very important message. At the same time, he tells the Iranian people, the protesters, we are behind you. Right? He doesn't say exactly what we're going to do, but we are behind you. So he's telling them, keep at it. We are behind you. And when the most powerful country in the world says that's an important message. And you have a situation today where, because of the 12-day war, the regime was exposed as being weak. Israel played an important part of that. America played part in that. When Israeli planes and U.S. planes could fly over Iran, Israeli planes were flying over Tehran, their capital, and not a single Israeli plane is shot down. That their air defenses are destroyed. Yes, that we can hit any target that we want to in Iran. They are exposed as being weak, and no authoritarian regime can survive if it's seen as being weak. Its own people will rise up and say, we don't want you anymore. The regime years ago lost any semblance of legitimacy. Maybe in the early years of the regime, it had some sort of popular legitimacy. Yes. No one believes the ideology of that regime anymore. The people who support the regime are there because they're related to the regime, to the corruption. They're getting kickbacks or whatever it is. The ideological element behind the regime died long ago. It's like communism in the Soviet Union during the Brezhnev period. No one believes the official state ideology anymore. And what is interesting is I saw part of the protesters were actually protesting against mosques. There were even vandalism against mosques. So they're not against religion, I presume, but they see the mosques in the cities of Tehran. They are apparatus of the regime. And that's because they're the regime, and people don't believe it anymore. And so they've lost legitimacy. They've lost a presence that they are all-powerful. The situation in Iran is terrible. The economic situation, the currency, the rial, it's not worth anything today. It's literally in the toilet. There's not energy in the Iranian cities. People don't have power. There's not water to drink in Tehran and in other cities. There's problem with supplies of basic things. Their infrastructure is falling apart, right? This is a country that could have been one of the most successful and richest countries on the planet. And it's a failed state, and the failure is bigger every day. And the people want better. And if I can say one last thing that is optimistic, is that there was a time when Iran and Israel had a good relationship. Before this government, the Islamic Republic, was established, when Iran was still a monarchy under the Shah, and he had his faults, right? No one's saying that he was a great Democrat. But under that period of time, Israel and Iran had a good relationship. Israelis would visit Iran. I, as a teenager, visited Tehran before the revolution, and it was, El Al was flying there. I took a flight from there. If there is regime change in Iran, it's a major, not only regional, but global game changer for the better. It is a huge, huge change. Where is Hezbollah without Iran? Where is Hamas without Iran? Where are the Houthis without Iran? We saw what happened to Cuba when the Soviet Union fell apart. So it'll be even more so with Iran's proxies. Without the financial, logistic, military support that they get from the Iranian government, they are a shadow of their former selves in the terms of their power. It really totally changes the Middle East. If Iran becomes a friend of America and Israel, it changes the whole dynamic in the Middle East. It's a revolutionary. It's a ground change. No one will be talking about the Abraham Accords because the new relationship with Iran will echo, and then you'll find countries in the Arab world competing with Iran. Who is the better friend of Israel and the United States? Because that's clearly where the direction of history will be.
Okay, well, it could be in several years from now that your scenario comes true. We don't know because, things happen so quickly in the Middle East. And that's a very rosy picture, given the fact that Trump is also friends with Turkey, friends with the Syrian leader. There are several problems here. And Saudi Arabia, which has said we're not going to let you use our airspace and don't. And even some of the Abraham Accords partners are saying we don't support an American attack on Iran. So, the Abraham Accords also are a little shaky at the moment, I would say. But I would say that one of the main reasons that President Trump cannot back down is because he does not want to be seen as resembling in any shape or form Obama, who openly abandoned the Iranian people. When Obama was inaugurated in 2009, there were protests in the streets of Iran over the stolen election. And Obama basically said, well, we have to let the
You
Iranians.
wrote a book about this.
I did. I wrote a book about how Obama basically followed in Jimmy Carter's path and Islamized the whole Middle East, basically. But the point is, at that time, his whole attitude was, no, we want to outreach to the Muslim world. And of course, what he meant by the Muslim world is not the moderate Muslim world. He was outreaching to the Muslim Brotherhood, to all the bad guys. And he said, we have to let the Iranian people make their choices. And Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, said, we're watching, we're observing what's going on. And of course, the protesters were gunned down. And that was basically, that was the end of that. And there is no way that President Trump is going to allow the New York Times or the Washington Post or anybody else to say, you see, it's like in the end, American foreign policy is like Obama. No way is he going to let that happen.
So I want to respond to two things you said. I think you're 100% correct. Trump sees himself as the anti-Obama. And we saw it with the previous American red line. Obama made the famous red line about Syria. If Assad uses chemical weapons against his own people, there will be consequences. In the end, he pulled right back, and there was some Mickey Mouse deal on the chemical weapons and so forth. But Assad didn't pay consequences. And when Trump came into office and he used chemical weapons, immediately there were military strikes. And actually, I'm not sure that after that, the Assad regime actually used chemical weapons against its own people again, because there were immediate military consequences by the United States. And so that's why I think also for President Trump, if he draws a red line, he knows the importance of keeping it because he is the anti-Obama. On the other issue, I want to take issue with something that you said about the Abraham Accords countries. So the Saudis can say what they say. The more important thing is what the Saudis do. And we know in the past, and we're talking basing on press reports, we're no longer inside government and know all the secrets. We're now basing on what's open sources. We know that in the past, when there was Iranian missile attacks on Israel, there are reports that Saudi Arabia allowed its airspace to be used to shoot down those missiles. We know that during the Gulf, other Arab countries as well involved across the Gulf, and Jordan and others, that can say all the pro-Arab, anti-Israel things at the UN, but when it came to cooperating in defending us against Iranian missiles, they were there with tangible support. And here I want to remind you that during the 2 years of war that we went through in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Iran, Lufthansa stopped flying to Israel, the German airline, British Airways stopped flying to Israel, Air France stopped flying to Israel, a bunch of American airlines stopped flying to Israel, yes? Every day from the Emirates, from the UAE, Fly Dubai was coming to Israel. And Etihad was flying to Israel. So to say to me and to our listeners that the Abraham Accords don't mean anything, I think the Abraham Accords are there. And once again, I have optimism. If there is change in Iran, and once again, the jury is still out, this regime could fight, this regime could be brutal, it might not be over. But when this regime falls, and it will fall, you could have a very interesting positive dynamic over who is more friendly with America, the Arab countries or the Persians. who is more friendly with Israel. I'll tell you what my historic background is. You know, Greece and Cyprus for years were very standoffish with Israel. But when Israel had a good relationship with Turkey, they suddenly decided they have to have a better relationship with Israel. And so sometimes people compete to be your friend, who's your most important friend. And I think that could be a very positive dynamic if there is a revolution in Iran.
Well, for sure. And I didn't say that the Abraham Accords have no meaning. I said that they are shaky. At first, one of the things we counted on was this was an anti-Iran axis. And that was one of the reasons that we assumed or hoped or whatever that Saudi Arabia was on the way to joining them, or at least giving tacit approval, etc. But now Saudi Arabia is openly siding with Iran, and Turkey is openly siding with Iran. And the UAE said to Trump, "Don't attack Iran." I meant it's shaky because in the end, you're right. They want to compete for America's attention, but America, Trump already gave he gave such a warm bath to Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, and he also said he just loves Erdogan of Turkey, and he also said that the Syrian leader is such a great guy, handsome guy, all that. Meanwhile, in Syria, Kurds are being massacred, all right? So I'm just saying, these people don't change their stripes so much. These jihadists do not just wake up one day and stop being jihadists. So there is where I'm skeptical. Where I'm not skeptical is in Trump's intention to conduct a serious military operation that is in the works right now. Obviously, I could be wrong, and maybe it's wishful thinking. But from what I'm seeing, I just highly doubt Trump is just going to say, I made all these grandiose statements and now I'm going to back down. I just find it hard to believe. Based on his past behavior, that's not what he does.
There are many experts who one can hear in the media, experts who will say things like, if America and Israel attack Iran, so then Iranian nationalism takes over, and that unites the people around the regime. And of course, that's rubbish. When people hate the regime, and they do hate the regime, and I think if there is a shooting war, if America decides to do a shooting war, if there's an Iranian provocation and Israel joins in the shooting war, and once again, I don't think Israel would do it out of the blue, but if there was an Iranian provocation against Israel, we could. I think we have to choose our targets very carefully. And what we saw in the 12-day war is that Israel and the United States have the ability to be very, very surgical. So we could target the bases of the Revolutionary Guards and the besieged, the people who are oppressing the civilians. I don't think anyone in the protest movement is going to be against us doing that. We could hit the gates, as we've done in the past, to some of the prisons where they're holding all the people being detained to allow them to escape. I don't think people would blame us for that. We could hit regime targets like the Iranian parliament, which is, of course, a hotbed for extremism, and because the extreme faction of the regime controls the parliament. We could hit the presidential palace. We could hit we could actually surgically target key regime figures like the most supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. In other words, we could do strikes back that would hurt the regime and that would actually energize the protesters.
Well, definitely. And that's what I'm hoping for. And that's what I believe is about to happen. Also, the protesters have been burning down government buildings and all that. We don't know to what extent, but we know that's definitely happening, and it's happening every night. And, as I say, I don't know what about the day after, etc. But I know that what you pointed out about all these years, we're saying if the regime is attacked or the nuclear program is attacked, then the Iranians will rally around the regime. Whether that was true in the past or not, I don't know. But I can tell you one thing. When Khomeini, not Khamenei, when the original Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned after 15 years in exile in France, returned to Iran to take over when there was the revolution that has lasted since 1979. And that year is when 52 U.S. diplomats were held hostage for 444 days, by the way. when he disembarked from the airplane and he was asked by journalists at the reporters at the airport, oh, you Ayatollah, Mr. Ayatollah, Your Majesty, or whatever, how does it feel being back in Iran? What does it feel like? And he said, I feel nothing. And what he meant by that was, Iran is irrelevant. It's Islam. It's the Mahdi. It's the 12th Imam. He wanted to spread Islam across the globe, and that's what he cared about, not Iran. He felt nothing. So this business of Iranian patriotism, he didn't even feel it.
Kultur, there's the famous Henry Kissinger line, I should say now the late Henry Kissinger line, where he said, what's the problem with Iran? The Iranian leadership had to choose whether they're a country or a cause. And they chose the latter. They chose a cause, and that cause was the global Islamic revolution. And if that's your cause, you can't be treated like a normal country. It was their choice. That's what they did. And the end of this regime, as I say, will not just be good for the people of Iran, first and foremost. It'll be good for Israel and for all Iran's neighbors, and it'll be good for the world, because this really is a terrorist, gangsterist, aggressive
Jihadist.
regime. And
Yeah.
for all those reasons, we should be happy they go. I tell you what the question is, and we go back to that you and me no longer work for government. We don't see secret intelligence anymore. But if Benjamin Netanyahu in the Prime Minister's office is reading Mossad's report, and they are saying that there are no signs of cracks in the regime's determination to survive, and so far the regime is holding solid, right? We aren't seeing defections. And if at the same time the CIA is saying the same thing to Trump, that the regime is holding strong and this could go on for ages and it can be a meat grinder because they'll keep shooting the people with impunity and so forth. Under those circumstances, will there be a temptation in Washington to say, let's cut the best deal we can with the regime while it's weak? Part of being a businessman, part of being a real estate tycoon is if the person you're negotiating with is weak, you get the best deal you can. And like in Venezuela, the regime will stay in power.
Well, no, because, first of all, Trump, when asked about all this, he said, of course they want to negotiate. We destroyed their nukes, and now they're on their knees. So it's not as though he's under any illusions. Oh, now let's get the best deal we can. What he thinks is, why I need a deal with them? They have to come begging for their lives from me. Okay, we won, they lost. That's basically his attitude.
He
Now,
said we want to win.
you are right
Yeah.
that in Washington, there is pressure on Trump from his vice president, J.D. Vance, and J.D. Vance's, followers and friends. And one of his close friends is Tucker Carlson, unfortunately. They are pressuring Trump not to take military action. And they're using all those, as I said in the beginning, let's not, it's going to be like with Iraq and the neocons, all of that. They are pressuring him to be more isolationist. Let's not get involved, and we'll get bogged down. All those that expression, bogged down, and so far Trump is not listening to them so far, and I really hope he doesn't. And on one last note, I would say about the disgusting international community. I hate that word, but you realize that Iran sits on the Human Rights Council at the United Nations. And do you realize, as you did point out earlier a little bit, you mentioned this, that when everyone was quoting, oh, what's going on in Gaza and what Israel is doing to the Gazans, notice silence on what the Iranian regime is doing to its own people. It is just outrageous. And that's another reason that it is necessary to defeat this regime, along with its Western apologists who ought to be ashamed of themselves.
So you're 100% right on the last issue there, where there's the so-called human rights activists who are out there demonstrating at Columbia University in New York and at British universities, and Australian universities and Canadian universities, Palestine. On this issue of the regime massacring its people, right? A totalitarian regime, right? Authoritarian with an ideology. So it's
And a theocracy.
a theocracy, a gangster regime, a corrupt regime, abusing its people. And it should be, it's a regime that's against gay people, it's against feminism. Women can't walk around safely without covering their head and so forth. And you'd think, this would be an issue on university campuses across the West. And yes, for some reason, when we see people demonstrate, it tends to be a few Iranian expats, right? And that's the sad story here indeed, and it says a lot about the intellectual milieu which is going along in much of the West. On your issue of Trump, and I think we're getting to the end of our time, and it's correct, within MAGA you have a strong isolationist tendency. They don't want to repeat what they see as the mistakes of Afghanistan and Iraq with overreach and boots on the ground. And one can actually understand that to a certain extent. And Trump, so far, when he's used military force, like in the 12-day war or against the Nigerian Islamists, he goes in, he makes a strike, and he leaves. Same with Venezuela, right? He's very judicious. He's very surgical with the way he uses military force. And I think he's so far, yes, we're what, a year and a bit into his presidency? Not even, no, only soon we have a whole year. But I think he's shown that you can avoid, so far, dangerous commitments that you get you bogged down and so forth. You can use military force in a way that is smart, effective, ruthless, powerful, but you don't get bogged down. And we'll see how that will apply in the coming days and weeks, how that applies in Iran. What I want to praise, and maybe we'll spend the last 3 minutes of our program talking about this, President Trump did a long interview for the New York Times, which is interesting that he agreed to do the New York Times. They're not particularly nice to him a lot of the time.
Understatement.
Yes. And he said there's something very interesting in that interview. He condemned anti-Semitism within the MAGA movement. He said there's no place in the MAGA movement for anti-Semitism. We've discussed it on this program. You've discussed it many times before, that certain anti-Semitic elements within the right of the United States have been given a platform, have been espousing these ideas. I think that the president, the leader of the MAGA movement, came out against that the way he did. I think that is deserving of praise.
Absolutely. And it shows another difference between him and his vice president. Because when J.D. Vance, a few days earlier, was asked about his position on anti-Semitism in the party or elsewhere, his response was one of those, it was like the leftist. He said, oh, all forms of hate are bad. There's no place for all forms of hate. It's a way of not talking about anti-Semitism. And since his close buddy is Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson's son works for J.D. Vance, as in his spokesman's department, he's been winking to those bad elements in the Republican Party, or they're not even in the party so much as they are outside supporters of it. So it remains to be seen what will happen with that. But one thing I will say is that by our next podcast, who knows what amazing things will have happened by then. I am certain that something is going down this week.
We will wait and see. And I will see you again on these chairs for our broadcast next week. Until then, Ruthie.
Forward to it.